Hey guys, George Mesa, Third Eye Edify podcast. And today, as it's been this year, I think that this interview with a guest I've already had on is going to go places I have yet to go on this show. It's probably going to take paths I have yet to ever take in any conversation I've ever had. But it all got sparked by this quick little fledgling thought that I had about me as a 10 or maybe even younger year old, and the way that I noticed the folding over of entertainment, the changing of the way that entertainment was coming to me, the changing of the availability of things like VHS tapes, and the seeming explosion of television shows, and the amount of television channels, by the way, which I think maybe we can kind of get into. And after I quickly discuss the topic, I think we're just going to kind of fly into this frenzy of ideas because it all ties together, as a lot of things often do. But this could be more important than a lot of the other things I've already discussed on this show regarding entertainment, how it molds your mind, how it shows you things, why it shows you things. And I'm beyond excited to have my guest, Kiano, back on the show. Not too long after the first one you had with us. We only met recently, but we've really, been finding a lot of common ground in so many different places. And I'm just very excited to know you. I'm more than excited to bring you to my audience. And you've got some pretty exciting things coming up on your horizon very recently as well. So please introduce yourself. Tell everyone about your new push with your Patreon channel and all the big stuff you've got going on for yourself. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, George. It is an absolute honor to be back. I absolutely love the synergy that we have and the open ability to delve into anything that comes to mind. It is truly an honor and a real breath of fresh air, especially in this day and age. Um, I'm very proud of what's going on right now with the Patreon. The Patreon has allowed me to attempt to streamline things into one essential channel. So from my numerology readings to decodes to everything that we do with Moon Feather Rising and Mystic Ronin on the Ronin experience, to the Mooniverse, to the Round Table, to here the Third Eye Edify, and everything with Slick Dissonant. Everything is showcased on in the Mystery Arcade, the Occult Multiversity. Everything is showcased, and you have archives where you can find information on just about any subject matter, especially in terms of the occult. You can find books that I have for sale that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else. You have access to the Telegram library, um, and you're supporting something that's not going to chop your finger off or your fingernail. I've been so downtrodden these last few years as I've seen numerology and gematria and some of these more occult practices flourish from people who are only concerned about the money, only concerned about the fame. I barely show my face, and I'm not saying that's what people should do, but we have to look at what people do and how they do it and who benefits. I want you to benefit. I don't benefit by being a pariah. I benefit by you understanding who you are, what you're capable of, and where you come from, and what time it actually is. More importantly, what time do you say it is? Because the time that you say it is in your mind, the time it's going to be, which actually brings us to our conversation tonight, understanding why we're shown what we're shown, why it's so impactful. how the synchronicities tie in, all of that good stuff.
Beautifully said, really. And I'm very excited for you too as well. You said multiversity, right? That was the word you used,
Yes,
multiversity?
sir. Mystery. Yes,
Genius.
sir. Multiversity, because thank you. The idea that we live in a universe has always been very intriguing to me. But if there is no true separation, if we all come from source, because people will jump up very quickly and say, but wait, we were here first, and
Mhm.
we made them, and they're not. No, everything. Who I don't care who you are. Everything is a reflection of you. Everything. If
Every little
that
thing.
were
Yeah.
not, you know what I mean? If that were not the case, then we actually wouldn't have some of the so-called issues that we think we have. That is exactly the case. So if everything is connected, if there is no separation, now we have to look into the idea of what is a movie. If we know that we live in a holographic universe, and we know that none of this actually existed in the first place, then what is a mistake?
Mm.
So this is automatic expansion, because now we're forced to move beyond the self.
Wow. And as we were quickly chatting before this, well, maybe it wasn't super quick. We actually talked a lot before we started recording, but the the self can be reflected, and these were your words, paraphrasing, when you watch a movie. You can become a person you would never be, for example, or you can see yourself in somebody else, or you can learn a lesson you have yet to learn that you've already had the opportunity to learn, but you just couldn't do it through somebody else's pain and suffering very often, as a matter of fact, because love and death are pretty much some of the only topics that ever come up in any story. So, the two movies that we're going to start with, and I'm not, maybe you noticed in the title, by the way, perhaps you already got it. But before we do that, I want to quickly read a phrase from this book from 1988 called Boxed In by, Mark Crispin Miller. I forgot his first name. And it's about TV boxed in, box, the television, of course, and how easily it can skew the minds of the masses. Something I've already discussed thoroughly on this show, in a very Bernaysian kind of way, perhaps. I went as far back as Shakespeare and further to discuss how one little tiny sentence in a play can change the minds of millions or billions of people about something like witches or whatever you want to start labeling. It's very easy for these mediums to affect everyone that hears about them. And many times throughout history, a lot of people that wrote plays, people that wrote symphonies, people that wrote operas, they would hide political concepts inside of mythology so that the audience could, take part in it and believe and respect what was happening. And yet they could kind of fly under the radar of whatever kind of authority would not like that, because you can't speak against the king, of course. So just a little more on the impact of cinema and or performance art in general. So here is a quick, sentence or two from this book that I think may be a very good little starting place for us to, set the mood, a palate cleanser, if you will. Thus, the culture of TV acts as a retardant on social progress, and the spectacle is regressive in another way. By emphasizing only the most visible events, TV, first of all, conceals social and economic reality in pious rituals that have upstaged the very struggle which produced them, and which they were meant, presumably, to maintain. Because there's clearly some kind of dividing line in a lot of different ways and a lot of different topics. It could be financially, wedge going right through the middle class. No one's left except on the outsides of it. Blue versus red, black versus white. There's so many different ways that they try to make things that don't even exist become these very concrete binary concepts in our mind. And TV and movies have done a very good job of keeping it going and making people think that they know something about an entire culture that they usually don't know much about if they're not, if they didn't grow up with it and are not in it. So the two movies that sparked my entire idea about this entire episode is Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. Anyone that knows them, maybe your opinion is that those aren't the two main ones to have, but the way that I heard about them, the way they were advertised, it's the two that really, I think, were placed right in our laps for a certain reason. And of course, this was happening before this, but the ideas of what was going on in these neighborhoods, the things that were going on in these, the way the movie placed it as gangs or, certain groups. I had none of these concepts in my mind if I wasn't watching the evening news. And even then, it was still not presented in the similar fashion that this was. This thankfully humanized some of it, but at the same time, it may have just kept promoting more of the things that create the kind of, lack of actual knowledge of something. Because when you watch a movie, you think you know something all of a sudden, and that may not always be the case. So before I talk about the little nitty-gritty details about, like, how many minutes the movies are, when they were released, directors, all that stuff, names, tell me what your thoughts are on these two particular movies, like where they sit in the whole flow of, bringing this exact style of entertainment to the masses.
Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society are classic movies, regardless of how you want to classify them, regardless of genre or how much money they made. The impact that they had and have is undeniable. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of that impact has come with a negative connotation. Um, they tend to be largely unquestioned movies. They just kind of are what they are, depending on who you're talking to. But when you really want to, pull the microscope out and look at them, you might be surprised at what you find, especially in terms of the directors and the producers, like the Allen, or what is it, the Hughes brothers?
Hughes
The
brothers,
Hughes
yeah.
brothers, who directed Menace to Society with the help of Bill Duke, who's a legendary film director and actor and writer, who actually makes a cameo in the movie,
Hmm.
along with John Singleton, who did something extremely controversial by casting a quote unquote rapper in his movie, through the controversial Ice Cube at the time, who was extremely controversial. America's Nightmare and Death
Mm-hmm.
Certificate and all these things. He had a lot of dealings at that time with the Nation of Islam, who was very controversial.
Interesting.
Um,
I didn't know that.
there was a lot. There's a lot tied to both of those movies. They are some of my favorites for a great many reasons. And as far as, being a quote unquote Midwestern or East Coast kid born and raised in Detroit, that was some of the first, that was like two of the biggest infomercials I ever had about California, right?
Right.
Being South Central Los Angeles and Watts, which, much like my city of Detroit, as many others, suffered riots in 1967. The Watts riot, the LA riot. Um, you know, these things are very connective. Even as a child, there was some hint of that. So how does that influence us as we grow? How do we look at those character types and tropes that are displayed in that movie? How does that affect us as we, grow into relationships? That's what we're here to figure out, because there's a lot of weight behind those narratives.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people know the stories, even if they didn't see the movies so much, almost like in a Star Wars kind of way. And they really were that popular. And I'm not sure if anyone watching is not perhaps not old enough to have been, the appropriate age to have been advertised these movies when they came out. It was a big deal. I ended up watching them a good amount of times, and some of my friends ended up watching them a ton too. And it just started. It seemed to start this flow of a heightened amount of TV shows and entertainment in this category. I clearly remember Martin, Fresh Prince of Bel Air, In Living Color. These were absolutely, 100, not only on my radar, but I was watching them. They were a part of my weekly routine in the TV show format. I had Boys in the Hood on tape. I watched it a lot, and back then that was a pretty new thing. Blockbuster Video was a fairly new idea. I had a local video store or two near me, but I wasn't really there. I never really ended up there actually. Until Blockbuster Video happened, I wasn't really in the game of renting movies and of course video games also, which came as a nice surprise when I first went to that place because I was definitely playing some games back then. But you brought up something very interesting about Menace to Society a few weeks ago as we've been kind of chatting and thinking about and getting up to this episode. And I want to get to that in a second. But before we do, just to double the impact that you were just discussing, it is pretty legitimate. John Singleton, at age 24, and I'm, quoting from Wikipedia here, first African American and youngest person to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director at 24 years old. I would say that's a pretty big deal. So this movie got all the clout. It wasn't just random luck that I happened to be, like seeing it in my group of friends and stuff. And a lot of my groups of friends were doing their best to imitate the way that everyone was acting in these movies. One of them put a pacifier in their mouth for like an entire month at least, if I recall. And this was a long time ago, so I don't really remember. Because there's a certain stride to the attitude in the movie. There's lingo that none of us had ever really heard yet. There's a whole nother level of culture that we hadn't seen because we were extremely young, as I keep saying, because I'm trying to remind everyone that until this point, it really wasn't there. In Living Color had some of it, but it was nothing like this, obviously. I mean, it still had Jim Carrey on the show, right? There was a good combination of things going on there. But it also had Morpheus in there, Lawrence Fishburne. So I think that's pretty interesting because not too long afterwards, he's going to take part in a pretty humongous movie right before the turn of the century. That was definitely a big deal. So two things I want to mention before I pass it back. I didn't know about the Bill Duke thing. I'm going to look into that for sure. But, three things actually that I want to mention. One of them just came up as you were talking. And the Hughes brothers also directed Dead Presidents. That was definitely a movie that was in that whole realm of, it was the same idea. You watch it, someone's going to get shot at the end. It's just working up to that final moment like Menace to Society did. In Boys in the Hood, main character Trey, he's with his father. He doesn't die at the end. He makes a decision not to. And Kane, the main character from Menace to Society, his father, I believe, was a drug dealer or got killed when he was young. And then, or maybe there were some scenes of him in jail too. I think, I haven't watched it in quite a while. And then he does die at the end. Quite a gory scene for sure. I think Menace to Society might have been the more gory movie. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I recall it being a little more shock and awe than when Boys in the Hood was. You had said, and I think it's true, and we're discussing the movie as if you've heard it at this point a little bit, so there are going to be spoilers. My dogs are going nuts. I'm very sorry about that. There's a character called O-Dog. And after watching several scenes with him in it, after you told me, it seems like he's not actually there. Much like a Tyler Durden kind of thing, except this movie was, 8 years earlier. So, I'm sorry, 6 years earlier. The last thing I want to mention before I pass is that you were talking about how impactful this medium is. And you compared it to music, like perhaps music is more impactful. But what I was starting to think about as I produced this outline is that until this, there was plenty of, just like Ice Cube doing his thing and other people in that entire category, they were discussing the plights that these movies were discussing. But until these movies hit, I just don't think it hit home for a lot of my generation until these movies happened. So perhaps far more impactful than the music ever would have had a chance to be.
So that was a lot. That was a lot, and that's a wonderful way to break into it. So one thing that came to mind, you know, if you're familiar with the movie National Lampoon's Vacation with Chevy Chase, the first one, there's a scene where they've gotten derailed and they're trying to get to Wally World and they're driving through Chicago. And the section of Chicago that they're driving through is kind of rough, right? Which is evident because as they're driving, um, the wife says something to Clark, and he's trying to be, the husband, the father, and be strong and brave. And their windows are down, and you hear a couple gunshots, and he's like, he's like, roll them up. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
But like, and as funny and as true as a reaction as that is, that was a quick way to sell you where not to go, right?
Right.
So when we look at these movies to a large degree, we're talking about two sides of the same coin. Boys in the Hood was largely meant to try to get people to go a certain way, right? Um, but the subliminal message, the underlining story was so much deeper than the one on the surface. And this is always the case with movies. There's always a surface level story, and then there's a subtle subliminal story that is you really have to pay attention because the things that are meant to grab your attention, you want them to grab your attention. It's called the suspension of disbelief, right? You
Right.
want to see something a little extra. But when we're being sold, especially a narrative through emotion, so case in point, um, John Singleton was a genius. He was a literal genius. Boys in the Hood was his first movie. His second movie was Higher Learning. I just want to stress that for the point that I'm about to make, because John Singleton knew numerology. He knew gematria. If you watch Boys in the Hood, you'll notice that Ricky, when he was a child, he sort of kind of got everybody in trouble with his football. Doughboy told him to leave the football at home, and he refused to. Plus, he had his brand new jersey on. Right? Do you remember? Do you remember what the number on his jersey was?
I only know now because of what you were saying earlier, but tell us, please, because I think it's a fake guess. I wouldn't have known. No, I don't remember.
His jersey number was 42. Why is that significant? Well, Martin from the TV show you mentioned earlier, which was also took place in Detroit, by the way. Martin lived in apartment 42. That's a question we'll come back to later.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
but especially when you look at the idea of John Singleton also making the movie Four Brothers, right? Also in Detroit, he had a thing for Detroit for some reason. Um, L.A., Detroit, and Atlanta are all a triangle of sister cities, but that's a whole nother story.
Mm.
You begin to see these narratives in subliminals for the undercurrent of a story, because while the story focused more on Trey, it really focused on his brother, which was Doughboy, because they told you they pretended that they were cousins when they were younger.
Mm.
They didn't say that about him and Ricky, you see, because Ricky was an aspect that had to die, because Ricky was not guided. Ricky didn't have the same self control as Trey or Doughboy, right? Because he already had a son, right? He gave up on his dreams trying to go into the army. Thus, it was able for him. It turned him into a liability, and he was able to be killed off as a sacrifice, so that Trey could now do what he was supposed to do, and then Doughboy could also avenge him and then die in the same way off camera weeks later, right? So you got this very bittersweet, somber kind of ending, as opposed to the horrific ending you got in Menace to Society. Now, Menace to Society, Kane's father was played by Samuel L. Jackson. A lot of people kind of forget that fact, right?
I did too.
Samuel L. Jackson went from playing a crackhead to playing a robber in Coming to America the year before. Matter of fact, no, 3 years before in '88.
Mm.
And then he played this character, right? This gangster who took no mess, who was a drug dealer, who was the only aggressive force his son ever knew, even against his mother. So now he decides to emulate this, right? Even in the presence of his grandparents. But what you begin to see when you look closely at these movies, especially when it comes to camera angles, especially when it comes to narrative, when it comes to who is actually speaking and who is looking at them speak, you will notice that a lot of these characters don't actually exist. So when you have Menace to Society, it was two eyes, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
formed
Like,
Roman numerals for the right, exactly. From the moment Menace to Society comes on, you see Kane and KD, aka, or I'm sorry, you see O Dog and KD, aka Kane, shoulder to shoulder. They're always shoulder to shoulder, right? When O Dog murders the shopkeeper, Kane drops his bottle.
mhm.
O Dog had his fingerprints all over the register, all over the body, all over everything. But then they never found his prints because he wasn't there. It was only Kane. When you watch Kane in the house with his grandparents, getting scolded by his grandfather, and O Dog comes over, no one acknowledges him. No one talks to him. Even when he walks outside and he says, Kaney, do you care if you live or die? Old dog standing right there and he's paying no attention because he can't even see. He doesn't exist.
Hmm. Wow.
So when you look at how things are shot, it reveals a lot. But now we're talking about more than just these two films. I don't want to necessarily get away from these two films, but if you look at Fight Club, like you mentioned, Fight Club actually gives you the keys to all of this.
Mm.
If you go back in film, you can see how from school days on, there was a certain criteria of information and programming being given out. Either you're going to go this way or you're going to go this way. It's always about a two-party system because one can never fail when you have the other to lean on. And that includes arch rivals.
Indeed. And I think the 90s had a lot of this. You watch the whole movie to find out the person was never there, like The Sixth Sense, let's say, and other ones like it. It was a major theme of that. Very interestingly enough, some sort of psychosis, and what a time, because people were kind of feeling that everything's just so amazing. What could ever go wrong? Right up until the end of right up until the early 2000s, of course. So I really think, as I do try to really pass the information as much as I possibly can on this show, that entertainment really does guide us through our own ages of culture, and on purpose. It's a machine. It's built to do this. We've been had, and we've just got to do our best to backtrack and study and make sure we can avoid falling for it again. And people think we're winning because TV is dying, but streaming is potentially 10 times worse in so many different ways. And I discussed it in my previous episode with the punctuality perversion, but it's much deeper than that. And it's okay to branch off into other things. These movies are the kickoff, because they were the kickoff for me, even though it wasn't my first taste. I really think this kind of changed everything for me and everyone I was surrounded by. So I know it wasn't just my neck of the woods. It had to be all over, and you're helping me realize that that's very true, of course. It must have been heavily advertised, big time. This movie was too big to fail, right? It was not going to fail. Boys in the Hood in particular. There was no way. All the other movies that came after it, it was a guarantee, essentially, that there was some kind of money grab to get, at least, even if they were good movies. The train was rolling. That was it. It was a new genre almost. Would you consider it a new genre at that point? Or was there many other examples of this before?
It was, it would be very easy to say it was new. It was a blockbuster for a already existing genre.
Mm-hmm.
So, before this, you had Colors, right, with Ice-T and Don Cheadle. You had Devil with the Blue Dress with Don Cheadle and Denzel Washington. You had Break In, and you had the Warriors. You had a
Right.
lot of even Cornbread Earl and Me with Lawrence Fishburne when he was very young. You
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of movies in this vein, but you didn't necessarily have a blockbuster, a movie that made so much money. The last time that had actually really happened, we're talking about the black exploitation era,
Right.
right? Like in the late '70s, and that's like Superfly and Shaft and things of that nature.
Shaft. Yeah. Yeah.
The these movies that were not supposed to make that much money. That's essentially what happened with Boys in the Hood. It was such a tragedy, but it was so beautifully and cinematically shot, um, with just the right amount of controversy. With this golden narrative of doing better. So at that time, we had the Dare. For those who may remember, Dare to Stay Off
To
Drugs,
stay
and
off drugs. Yeah.
Nancy
Yeah.
Reagan's. Uh, you know what I mean? All of that. So, the movie actually had promotion from the
Mm-hmm.
government. You know what I mean? That couldn't be the case with Menace to Society. And remember,
Right.
Menace to Society was originally supposed to star Tupac. You know what I mean?
Oh.
Tupac actually got into physical altercations with the directors. So that couldn't happen. You know what I mean? Um,
Whoa.
but they turned that infamy into what was then a cult classic because it was literally the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Because this was to influence the faction of the urban area or the hood that would not do better, that would not uh, go to prison and not go back, that would not go back to the game, that would not go back to the gun, go back to a certain hustling lifestyle. This was specifically for that because that's all it promoted. Um, Even to the point. So if you understand that old dog didn't actually exist, you'll understand how they shift perspective. So when you actually saw Cain die at the end, that was the good in him
Mhm.
dying. Because remember that Chauncey had already sent the tape of the robbery to the police. So that's why you saw the flash after the the drive by in the end. You saw the flash of O-Dog being put into the cop car
Mm.
because that was because he allowed that aspect of himself to take over.
Right.
That's why you in the scene where they're driving with AWACS and they're arguing because old dog is in the back seat and he wants to be in the front seat, i.e., he wants to be in control. But Kane is still fighting because he's saying things like, I'm not killing no kids or no women.
Mhm.
Old dog's in the back seat talking about, I don't care who's out there. You see what I mean? And that makes old dog smile. So everyone is being this vicious, brutal kind of mentality, and the one person who's trying to fight it dies in the end. You see, but he doesn't actually die. You can see the same in
I lost you for just a moment. You can see the same narrative
he's
in.
not there.
I lost you for just a sec. Same narrative in what?
I, I'll just ask you one question, just one
Yeah.
question. How did Nino know that G Money was smoking crack? That's it. That's it right there. Because there's absolutely no way,
So it's the same thing
no way he knew because he was him.
because it was him.
That's why you see him disrespecting. That's why you see him disrespecting his girlfriend, and then he's sleeping with G Money's girlfriend. They're the same person. You see, like it's even when Ice T is undercover and he's walking to the basketball court with that leather trench coat on. Just pay attention to where Nino is standing and where G Money is standing. No one's looking at Nino. No one's paying any attention. The words are coming from Nino's mouth, but G Money, everyone's looking at G Money like he's the one speaking because he is.
And that's the biggest trick they always use. They always do that one. Out of all the tricks and all the camera tricks and all the other stuff, they always use that particular trick where you see one of them talking, the focus isn't there. It's exactly right. It's an iconic scene, him walking with the trench coat for sure. So, all right. So, we there's a lot to unwrap here because this isn't, I think we're not old, but me and you are similarly aged. We're approaching 45 ish. We're not there yet, obviously, but the humongous problems with segregation are really just, they were not far from this time that we're living in even now. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, World War II wasn't even really that long ago, if you want to think about it that way. We're not out of the woods yet as far as in lots of different regions, just in this country alone. The mindset is still there. the way things used to be. And when entertainment decides to take a certain turn, there's usually something pretty nefarious behind it. You had mentioned the riots that took place in the 60s. And there were some riots that took place not long after these movies. Or was it during the time that these movies came out? I don't quite remember, actually.
Well, in between,
They were
because
they were
Boys in
in
the
between.
Hood, yeah, Boys in the Hood was 1990,
I think
1991.
91. Yeah, July 12th. I just have it written down.
And then Menace to Society was 1993.
Right.
Rodney King was 1992.
No kidding. Right? And smack in
You
the
know,
middle of this.
1992, 1991. I actually just posted about it. I'm trying to remember the
Really?
date,
I'll,
but I'm
I'll check it
almost
right now.
positive it was in between.
That's crazy. Okay, so you know, there's no I'm not feeding a direct correlation. It's not like this movie sparked a riot, but the timing, those riots were potentially the most televised. I mean, it was just you could not see, you did not turn your television on without having this information in front of you. It seems like there's something there. There's definitely something there. I'm going to look it up right now just to see what the time was because that's definitely worth knowing. Wow, man.
And then remember also, during this time you had the so-called trial of the century going on with OJ, which was also in LA. You know
Also,
what I
right?
mean?
Yeah,
So, there were a lot of fuel sources.
very true. Yeah, this was March 3rd, 91. So just a few months before this movie, which means the movie was already done. You don't just film a movie like this in 2 months and release it. So it's right. I mean, for them to be essentially coming out in this almost in the same season of the same year, and to know that this was a different kind of a blockbuster, unfortunately. And who helped? And who helped? This might be a good way to segue into this before we even consider what could be the second half of this, because this could easily, as I've said many times on this show, this could easily be a very, very, very long conversation. Um, I truly believe that MTV fits into this big time as well. And I want to get into the Wayans, Keenan Ivory Wayans in particular, Keenan Ivory Wayans. No surprise in that name whatsoever. Um, but MTV had news. It did show you, just in case that's all you were watching all day, every day, right? They still had news segments. It was, of course, MTV News and other things. You know, as MTV became less and less music, which happened almost overnight, it wasn't at this point. Definitely not. But they're a factor. And I have it, I forgot what it was actually. Just after midnight, August 1st, 1981, MTV begins its broadcast. Starts at midnight, by the way. Just a reminder that I just said that. It starts with the Buggles. Video killed the radio star. Killed is in the title of the very first thing that ever appears on MTV. The video starts with a shot of the moon, and then you actually get to see the name of the song. Video killed the radio star. And of course, you get Rocket Ship Blast Off is actually the very first thing that you get for MTV's very first broadcast. Rocket Ship blasting off, and then the astronaut placing the flag on the moon, of course. And not long afterwards, I don't think anyone can debate the negative impact that MTV had had on our culture. And I don't think anyone can debate that, for the most part, as far as I personally remember, with Real World, the Real World, that was my first taste of reality TV. And I think that triggered an entire, almost like mass psychosis of a need for reality television, reality television, as if That is not, something that's completely made up from scratch. Um, I really believe that I knew more about what was going on with this stuff, with riots, with racism, with bigotry in general, and the more negative aspects of what the culture could be. And let's not even mention rock the vote and all this other stuff. The more I think about it, the more I realize that every step of the way, MTV was definitely there to help these things along. All these things seem to go hand in hand. And of course, it helped it gave a more powerful, because like you had said, perhaps TV movies is more powerful than music alone. And through MTV, now hip hop gets a video aspect to itself, and you can see them. And Tupac, what you meant, Tupac and Biggie, their story was being told on MTV. For me, I didn't get it anywhere else. So I think there's a good connection to be made here in a certain respect. What do you think about all that?
Most definitely. MTV, they literally made the Notorious movie about Biggie,
I didn't
with
know that.
along with countless documentaries and series. They have always had a very, very big foot on the gas in terms of propagating certain things and certain images, certain narratives. To a large degree, along with the source and a few other publications, they're almost solely responsible for the supposed East Coast West Coast war with
I agree.
Tupac and Biggie, and that was a whole MK Ultra Janus program going on with two sides of the same coin. Tupac being a Gemini and Biggie supposedly coming up under him with another double persona narrative. It is so blatant when you actually look back at it, but the idiocy of an East Coast West Coast war when Tupac was born in New York. Just you know what I mean? Like how could he wasn't even from the West Coast, but this is why he was chosen as a puppet in this narrative, essentially, at least from that level, because he was powerful enough to sway no matter what. But mind you, again, he went to a school of the performing arts.
Right.
You know, the people will tell you stories about Tupac being this shy little kid who got tired of taking one too many beatings, and he began to emulate what he saw.
Yeah.
There's stories about him shooting police. There's a whole narrative, of how much of this is actually real. Shout out to industry hoax. You know what I mean? The levels of information that the supposed FBI had on not just him but his entire family
Mm,
is extremely questionable.
I
And
see.
in the midst of all of this, he's the hottest young actor in Hollywood. Tupac was supposed to be Mace Windu in Star
Right.
Wars.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's some very, very questionable things, when we really get down to it.
Very interesting. And I want to add that you were right about 92 because that's when the LA riots were. And Rodney King was 91, but it kind of eventually turned into that. So you were totally right in between those movies. There's no coincidence. There's no coincidence. It's all theater. Now that, and it's like 9/11. It's like anything else that happened. The bad things happened. People died. But there's ways to manipulate not just entire regions, but entire cultures. And this is how you do it. This is how you do it. There's this, there seems to be that it's almost as if people think it's magical, but it's actually magic. Do you know what I mean? I know you know what I mean, but do you know what I mean, man? It's hard to put that into any other words.
Yeah, yeah. It's magic is science that hasn't been explained yet. So, it's very easy to look at something and not quite understand it and just be in awe. When you're a child and you see, at this point now, right, a flat screen, for
Right.
example, turn on and all the colors explode, or your first video game, it's like, oh my God, wow, like this is, and then you get desensitized and you get used to it, right? So there's always been this totalitarian tiptoe aspect to expansion and especially narrative. This is why it's so important to be aware of what it is we actually ingest with our eyes. Your eyes suck in light, right? So, the idea of TV being quote unquote bad is not even so much about what you watch. If I'm looking at the entirety of my living room and anything is possible in my living room, but I'm focused on this TV, regardless of what size the TV is, just the fact that I'm only focusing in on this TV is an issue because now I'm actually limiting what's actually possible. Because, see, no matter what you watch, it gets into you. You don't get into it. It's very much a one-way street. It doesn't work that way. And that's why it's so detrimental to be cognizant of what we take in and why. Why these things are popular, why these things attract us, because, you know, we have to have a strong guard. We have to have a strong consciousness. Your consciousness is what catches any and everything. And if it doesn't catch it, then it's automatic programming. And if you're not the programmer, at some point you're going to be in trouble.
Damn straight, man. That's 100%. And trouble is, as wonderful as the turning point seems to be, as clear as we can almost see the light at the end of the tunnel, where it's going to be messy, but afterwards, we're finally going to be seeing some, real change from the powers that never were. But it's hard to put into words, But a lot of people they are still under the spell, and they think they aren't. And they don't look back and think, what about this? What about that? Was that really me? Was I guided? Was I molded into something I shouldn't have been? TV can do this. And I think a big part of it, I actually discuss it in my new book, that it's not your parents' fault. They were tricked too. We were all kind of led into this. And some of my notes, I'm not reading it word for word, but whose fault, right? Was this really a regular evolution of entertainment? Because at the point that you see things like Tyler Perry, and I don't know, but it almost seems like he's making fun of his own heritage sometimes. It's, he's dressing up like women and stuff, which is a whole nother thing. And I'm sure maybe that would be an hour 2 thing, I think. It's disheartening to see it. There were a lot of directions that this went. And it almost seemed as if let's just take the Keenan Ivory Wayans, for example, In Living Color, and many of the other things that he had done. He helped Eddie Murphy Raw. I clearly remember that from my youth for sure. He actually was a part of that, which I didn't know until I looked it up. I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, Mo Money, Blank Man. There would seem to be this sort of a head bow to be like, okay, I'm making these, and all these movies are 89 minutes, by the way. Just a strange little thing there that I noticed. a lot of the, he really followed a formula when he started making these movies. And that already should be alarming in a certain way. To me, it is. And the head bowing almost seems like, okay, we can't just appeal to one, portion of the country. We want to be able to appeal to the masses. We want to grab all these 9 to 5, people. We want to be able to grab, they're reaching out on the other side of the aisle. They wanted to grab the white culture. They wanted to grab the white culture in a different way than it may have been for the previous 20 years before this, where let's say it's, oh, okay, we're victims and you're the problems and you need to feel shame and we need to feel angry. Again, a very cut and dry binary aspect to it all, but that's how it's pushed. And the news makes a big part of it, but the stories like that MTV pushes, the way that they advertise the riots, the way that they show you that they happened, they never tell you about they never give you the why, actually. They just kind of show it to you like, look what's going on in this place. I don't understand it. What's happening here? And then we get all these movies that are, they can appeal to anyone because they don't focus on their own culture and heritage. They just do their best to be like another slapstick, silly comedy, which there's already plenty of that going on. It's reverse Tin Pan Alley. Jazz was a beautiful product of this country. Speaking of whether or not hip hop came from New York, jazz would be a fair way to say if jazz came from there, maybe that did too, right? But back in the Tin Pan Alley, all these black musicians were just killing it. And they're like, okay, you know what? They're not selling anything though, are they? They don't have the business. We're going to get our own singers to just redo these songs and they're going to be great and everyone's going to love them. And then now we get the opposite. Now it's like, well, there's all this white entertainment. Why don't we just flip-flop it? And why don't we just like kind of sprinkle our own edge on it and we'll make millions of dollars and we'll demean ourselves in the process and nothing will change. It won't benefit anyone in the, in the like whatever you want to call it, race war or the kind of like overall cultural arc where even now we still get, oh, Trump has the black vote. Like, okay, just saying that is disgusting to begin with. It's ridiculous. And I know that was a lot, but what do you think, man?
No, it is a lot. And we can't play games like it's not a lot. We have to address it. It's powerful what you said about Trump because listen, Trump came out, Trump got a hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to get too spiritual. I don't want to get too spiritual, especially in terms of Trump.
Right.
But Trump got hit with a $364 million fine or whatever that was.
Right.
Mind you, 364 is what you get when you are in true divine feminine time, right? I.e., 13 months at 28 days apiece will give you 364, right? Now we add a day at a time, which actually is a leap year, which actually got completely transmogrified into what we have now with the Gregorian calendar, where we have 12 months hiding at the 13th, right?
Yep.
So he got slapped by the divine feminine, and what did he do? He tapped into the souls of Negroes, and he put out Trump shoes for $399. And they sold out in 2 hours. So to say that he has the black vote would really be an understatement.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like these, as ignorant as that may be to somebody, that is extremely spiritual. Extremely spiritual. When we, what you said about the films and the coonery, is so poignant. When I think about the riots When I think about Rodney King, I also think about Reginald Denny. If you remember him, Reginald Denny was the white truck driver
Right.
who, during the
Yep.
riots, got pulled out of his truck and was
Yes.
beat on camera. Like that was like going viral before going viral.
That was
You
the
know what I mean? That was just
viral,
on
man.
TV and the news.
Wow. That was like it. That you're right.
You
You're
know what
right.
I'm saying?
Yep.
So when I look at Keenan Ivory Wayans and what he actually did, well, there's a legendary movie that he made really breaking into Hollywood with Robert Townsend,
Mm.
Hollywood Shuffle, right? Which showcased what it was like for black actors trying to quote unquote make it in a white Hollywood. It was extremely hard. Mind you, when you understand that stereotype is synonymous with ritual, you can understand why a lot of these things are decades old, right? So, it took a lot to begin to break that, to even address it. Um, Keenan Ivory Wayans, to a large degree, said, okay, we're going to parody everything
Mm.
so we can actually tell the most truth. And hopefully somebody will see that somebody will remember that there's actually more truth in jest than anything else. And he's never made a serious film, not one time. Robert Townsend, he made one of my favorites in being The Five Heartbeats, which started off as a story about the Temptations, but because of a lawsuit in Motown, they had to change it and make it about the Dells, right?
Really.
But but largely in that movie, they had to deal with the idea of crossing over
Mm.
because they were such a powerhouse among the urban community. But even then, numbers weren't our numbers didn't generate what the white numbers did,
Sure.
you know. So the crossover just made the record label and of course everybody essentially more money. So, there was always this narrative about, do I cross over? Do I even try to cross over? Do I accept it once I cross over? And that turned into detriment, just complete and utter detriment because no one wants to talk about it. However, if you make a joke, everybody can laugh about it. And now the seed is planted because everybody remembers something funny. So that's one thing I can give Keenan Ivory Wayans. I can't do that for Tyler Perry
Mm.
because Tyler Perry um, is the epitome of who I'm trying to choose my words carefully.
Mm.
Um, he's the epitome of a coon. Um, and I don't see anything positive from what he's done or what he's doing. The one thing I could say is he's almost single-handedly saved Hollywood because the majority of movies being shot are no longer shot in Hollywood. They're actually shot in Atlanta in his massive studios.
What?
Oprah Winfrey, and I'm not an Oprah Winfrey fan by any means. I just pay attention. Oprah Winfrey has one of the largest studios within his studio. And there are several studios, for other people that he has just given away. So in terms of that, for anybody who's fans of Marvel, a lot of Loki, Marvel's Endgame, Infinity War, Black Panther, and quite a few others were shot in Tyler Perry Studios. So I'm not saying you should thank him or be thankful or anything like that. I'm just pointing it out. But that's the one positive thing I can find among, you know, imitating a woman, um, as opposed to just hiring a woman.
Mm-hmm.
you know. But to each their own. Um, he hasn't done anything that has really stood the test of time. I appreciate my grandmother and anyone's grandmother to the point that I would never ridicule them. But we can see this narrative. So, for those who remember the Nutty Professor, for example, Eddie Murphy, they began a ritual of um, disrespecting the grandmother, disrespecting the matriarch. And it was almost subtle in the first Nutty Professor. But in the
Mhm.
second one, I believe it was the clumps. Even in the commercial, Eddie Murphy's character had found a way to become Buddy Love again, and his own grandmother didn't recognize him, and she was trying to have sex with him in a hot tub. And they literally in the commercial showed her dropping her panties and taking her teeth out. This is a grandmother. You would never see this from other quote unquote races. I have yet to see it,
Right,
but
right.
this is
Wow.
this is what they do in the name of humor because people will see it and laugh and they won't really think about what it is they're laughing at. It's just funny because it's what's propagated.
Wow, man. The main takeaway here is that it's not just every so often that a movie has this much hidden stuff in it. It's very often, especially if it's considered to be coming from Hollywood or popular in any right. It's not a lucky break. It's there for a reason. It's there for a reason. You have to take it in. You have to invite the vampire into your house for them to have power. That's big, man. That was big, dude. I there's I have a lot of other notes actually. But I I think that we've crossed over an hour here, right? And I'm this is why I had you on, man. I'm so glad that you kind of cleared my air about the Keenan Ivory Wayans thing, and you also gave me a little more to think about with the Tyler Perry thing because I've always been thinking about it because these things bother me a lot because to anyone who well, let me put it this way. There's so many people that are yes, let's just call it MK Ultra to put a broad stamp on it. So many people that are under the gun of the powers that be to bring certain things to the masses. It's not like it used to be with some philosopher writing in Latin that was born in Germany and they're trying to bring you all this information because it's from their heart and they have to do it. Or because maybe they're also, who knows, under the gun. There's millions and billions of dollars going into all of this. A lot of times you'll find some of these movies might not even be doing that well at the box office. But well, first of all, they're streaming now, so you can still sell afterwards. But it's not about making money. It really isn't. They have to pass these messages along. They have to bring you to this point. They have to make you think a certain way about a certain group, whether they're from Iraq or Africa or Russia. They need you to think a certain way. And the only way to get it done is through these mediums. And if you're not watching news, you get it this way. If you're watching news, you're getting exactly what they want you to get all the time. That's just the way it is. But this is a more subtle and a more beautiful way, fortunately, because look at how detailed, and we haven't even sat on one movie for a while, but the level of detail we can discuss in any one of these movies is actually pretty deep. Even the ones that seem corny, even the ones that seem like, oh, I never even really liked that movie that much. Like, what about, Friday, which was just like every single person I knew watched Friday a million times. And and I guess Don't Be a Menace too, but I have a feeling Don't Be a Menace was a bit more adolescent, and I could be wrong about that. But There's many other parallels with other movies that I think we'll save because there's a lot more there's much deeper levels here to discuss. I really think we're being kind of hour one safe on some of the topics, and that's good because I want people to expect more from hour two. And I think we're really going to be able to be a little more free, just kind of let our minds flow and, talk about what. I mean, we didn't even really get into your specialty of numbers that much. I want to talk more about the 42. I want to talk more about 11. I want to look at some of the debut dates and some of the running times of some of these movies. There seems to be something to look at for sure. But let me ask you this. If you don't have any extra comments based on what I just said, I have one last question for hour one here because I was always very curious and I wonder what you know about this or what your opinion is about the show In Living Color. What do you think the title, why do you think it was called that? What do you think it means?
Well, great question. In Living Color was a reference to melanin.
Really?
Um, Keenan Ivory Wayans was well, I would imagine I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he still is a fan of Richard King and Richard King's book, The Key to Melanin, which was very popular um, in the early '90s, especially um, once once cable media really started picking up. Once it became, or once we got cell phones,
Right.
um, information traveled very very fast, very very fast. That was essentially the first real faction of the internet. Even um, before texting. Um, in Living Color is also a reference to how color can draw you in, especially with music. That's why they had the Fly Girls, right?
Right.
Where
The
you saw
dancers.
J
Yeah.
Lo essentially for the first
Oh, yeah.
time, right? Um,
I didn't know that.
and that was also a way for Keenan to utilize his entire family
Right.
because his mother, a lot of people don't know, what I'm saying? Like you really have to kind of delve into the history of the Wayans a little bit. But Keenan did everything according to what his mother told him to do. And his mother told him, you better take all these badass kids with you if you want to go play actor.
Yeah.
So he couldn't play at first, he couldn't play actor unless he was directed.
Right.
His friend Robert Townsend from New York said, hey, look, we got to make our own movies. He said, well, I got a whole family of actors right here. So he had that he took that same formula and that same mentality to his TV show. So he had his little brother, his baby brother, as a DJ just so he could give him a job.
Yeah. Right.
Like they actually had a really funny skit where he stole the mic and had this little rant for like 2 minutes. But he employed his entire family, but his whole family was funny because they didn't really have much of a choice. You know, um, they did, not to get off subject, but they had the Scary Movie franchise,
Right.
which was literally stolen from them. You know what I
Really?
mean? Because it was too influential under their control.
Uh-huh.
It was much the same with In Living Color because if you watch In Living Color, you'll see how they started out with Jim Carrey, who was this incredible phenomenon, right? Because he had the backing of he had a certain people's vote like Trump, right?
Mhm.
And then they tried that with three other white characters once he had left, and they don't even have careers to this day.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yep.
But they had to try it in order to get extensions for seasons because they don't care how funny you are. A perfect example would be who remembers the UPN network?
Yeah. UPN 9 was for me anyway.
Right. UPN had all of these incredibly ignorant TV shows
Yep.
that you can't even find on DVD today.
Right. Yeah, I didn't watch any of it. It just none of it seemed like it was in that didn't have the magic, you know?
No, no, it didn't. You had rare gems, maybe, for those who liked maybe Moesha.
Hmm.
You had the phenomenons like a different world, but nobody remembers just the 10 of us. You know what I mean?
No.
Nobody remembers Lincoln Heights, which was
Mm.
a horrible, horrible series, selling all kinds of it was like the Beverly Hills 90210 of the ghetto. It was horrible.
Oh
But this
man.
is, but these things to be cognizant when they put these shows out, which is so ritualistic, is a very, it's a priceless kind of thing. If you follow people's careers, like take Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy was a phenomenon. He did Raw, he did Delirious, his stand up. He came in the game with such hot movies, 48 Hours, Coming to America. And then he did Harlem Nights. And Harlem Nights didn't quite make the money it could have made, it should have made because of the narratives of the movie. You
Mm.
had a smart black mob family taking down Sicilians in New York. No,
Yeah.
that's not going to play. He did an interview. He did an interview where the interviewer was really putting him down about this movie not making so much money and what are you going to do and blah blah blah. And he's okay, no worries. I'm gonna, I'll get right back to it. And he went and made another 48 hours. He kind
Right.
of went back to that slapstick. And he kind of took a hit after that, right? And what got him back was he did a series called The PJs,
Mm.
right? The PJs was a claymation animated series, and it was the complete apocalypse of the ghetto. I mean,
No kidding.
that's literally what it was. It was a mockery of our quote unquote current apocalypse in the hood.
Wow. I don't remember that at all. And, it does kind of ring a bell actually, but it was off my radar.
Um,
It was off my radar for sure.
After that show, he got rewarded, and he was doing the voice of Donkey in Shrek.
Right.
And then he began making movies again of a certain caliber.
Mhm.
But see, that's the way it works. It's kind of like wearing the dress. Either you're going to wear a dress, or you're going to be ritualistically killed, or you're going to be cooning.
Right. It's one or the other. Yeah. It's because this is not the kind of industry that you just do your thing and you have a great time and you make some money. It's just not that simple. You're There's too many eyeballs on what you're doing. You do not have full control. It just doesn't work that way. It's never going to work that way. I mean, we're still we're still talking about actors here. We're still talking about cinema and theater, staged things, staged events, staged movies. They wouldn't need advertisement if they were just inherently amazing and everyone needed to watch it. It doesn't work that way. And I think that brings us full circle back to where we started. The movies that we started talking about to begin with, they were advertised so well that I didn't know anybody that didn't see them at least once. Possibly in the theater, but definitely when it came home because I certainly didn't see it in the theater. But I had already seen plenty of gory movies by then, so it's not I didn't have any trouble with that. But and I also wasn't looking to own. I mean, I had already been firing guns, shotguns and rifles and little things. It wasn't a big deal. It was just for like target practice, and maybe I almost got to hunt a few times. Never happened, but it didn't change me. Mortal Kombat didn't make me want to kill people. It wasn't. They were some people were doing their best to make it seem like everyone was being turned into a gangster because of this stuff. And if that were true, then MTV would be just as much to blame also, right? It didn't happen to most people. It doesn't. It is just entertainment for most people. So not even to make a point there, I was just kind of thinking out loud with the level of advertisement really is such a humongous, humongous factor. I see a lot of New Line Cinema, for example, which WB took over since 2008. And I thought that UPN 9 turned into WB. Is that right? Did they flip flop into that? Because I do recall that. And I could be wrong, though.
Exactly right.
They did.
Exactly.
So there you go. There's Warner Brothers just sitting there. They're not going to miss out on anything. These guys, they're always going to be there. They're always going to be there, man. So give me any final thoughts that you might have, because I think that we have a little bit to go. If you do, I think we got a little bit more to talk about here, maybe in the second half.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I'm just getting flashes of examples. Um, I was trying to think of about directors,
Yeah.
right? But at the same time, I didn't want to get away from the movie. A point I wanted to make, just to show you how deep the rabbit hole can really go. Take a look at, so-called epic like Malcolm X by
Right.
Spike Lee, right? Definitely an epic movie. But when you really look at it, it allows you to relive a trauma halfway,
Mm.
because essentially you automatically know how that movie's going to end. You know Malcolm's going to die, right?
Right.
If they choose to show it. But of course they chose to show it. Now, what's interesting about that is they show you what happened, but they don't show you the entire story, because Malcolm was rushed from shooters from beneath the stage he was speaking on. But when they actually examined his body, he had been shot from above, because what came out in the court cases, which was available to Spike Lee at the time he was filming this movie, so
Right.
i.e., he knew this.
Wow.
He could have depicted the CIA that was in the room above behind the wall that had actually shot him. He did not do that. He chose to let you draw your own conclusion about whether it was just some random Negroes or whether it was the CIA. We know that the men who actually killed him, or at least who were purported to, have actually gotten out of prison, while his children have still been killed. He didn't show any of Betty Shabazz's work that she continued after his death for decades, right? None of that was even mentioned.
Mm.
So if you really know the history of Malcolm X, you would be disgusted by that movie. But this is how far gone we are as far as looking to cinema for our own history, even by people who quote unquote look like us making it.
It's funny that it's Spike Lee, because one of the ones I didn't mention that was in the notes from June of '89 was Do the Right Thing. You would hope that he had done the right thing for this movie, and it doesn't sound like he did. And he also made Jungle Fever right around that time. And maybe we can talk about that. Maybe we could start there an hour or two, because that movie I think had some implications that were, according to my young mind at the time, unnecessary, and it could have had a little bit of a chain reaction. So we'll see. They had some pretty popular actors in there too, actually. Great way to end it, man. That's worth mentioning because there it is. He had access to all the information, and with his power, I mean, even if you don't know any of his movies, you know he's sitting at all the Knicks games. Like he's just a popular guy, you know? That says a lot. That says a lot. Somebody that really had a genuine opportunity and not only potentially wasted it, but also potentially either avoided it on purpose or avoided it under the gun. Because it could have very easily wanted to have done it and then no way. Like you're too popular. There's too many people are going to watch this. And that comes right back to what I said. There's too many eyes on these things. They have to be a certain way. They have to come out at a certain time. They have to come out side by
Well,
side,
that's
right with the riots. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, that's most definitely true. That's most definitely true. And then, a lot of these people belong to organizations where they have to move a certain kind of way because,
Right.
they will do anything and everything in their power to show you what group they belong to and the hows and the whys. Like if I was to ask you, for example, what was the right thing and do the right thing?
I don't remember at
Because
all. I watched it when it came out, man.
well, what they showed you was George Floyd. They showed you Radio Raheem get choked out while everybody just watched and did the
Yeah.
right thing. And then they destroyed their own. So, well, we can argue, oh, well, they destroyed Sal's pizza shop,
Mhm.
but Sal had insurance. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of thing, that kind of program. And that goes back all the way to school days. Because see, in school days, he showed you what group he was because you see the skull and bones on the movie poster, right on the cover,
Wow.
with Juan Carlo Esposito
Right. Right.
and Tisha Campbell in school days.
Wow. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well said, man. This is great. Thank you. This has been a very oh, it's a lot of soul searching, a lot of like I'm really going back on my I'm trying to relive my time through this as I was kind of like my hand was taken through it all. And yeah, my parents were watching a lot of this stuff with me, but not over and over again like I was, and maybe not all the shows. But again, almost everyone I knew was really entrenched into this, and the culture was there, and it hit a lot of other facets of American culture as well, which I didn't talk about any of them yet. So definitely come back for part two. I think we're gonna find some. Maybe we'll tweak a few things and get even deeper into just what is programming. Just what is it? How does it work? Why is it used the way it's used? And how many decades in advance are they planning this stuff, man? It's unreal. Well, you know where to find me? Go to my website, thirdeyedify.com. You'll catch all my stuff. You can catch my merch shop, check out my new book. I just put up a new section in the merch shop with my "Do I Exist Alien" shirt. I think that it's a silly play on words, but it really has a major impact for me. And please tell them wherever they can find you, Patreon, everything else. Please check out what this man is doing. He's offering quite a service to the world right now.
Thank you for that. I greatly, greatly appreciate that. please check me out on Patreon/Konami Codes and check out the Mystery Arcade Occult Multiversity, where any and everything occult, from video games to movies to books. I have a section where in the shop where you can get a reading if you are looking for any kind of numerology, gematria, astrology, Eastern or Western, of any occult nature. I can help you. If you are looking for an occult library, I have one available, I believe you may enjoy on Telegram, which is now private. And that this is the only way you can get in. It is a very small price, $3. The last thing I'm trying to do is be a pariah. I want to offer the information that I know is transformative, especially at the current time that we're in, but also provide information you're really not going to find on social media, because every time I post it, I get in trouble. So I created my own platform.
Amazing. A media platform is the way to go. For sure, man. You are requiring so much, and you, just for anyone who doesn't know, it's not like he's doing one or two things a week like this guy. We're talking about many things a day. He's constantly working to add value to what he's doing, just in the regards of what you can catch through his archives and through his library. And it's a library. It's in Alexandria, basically. It's a modern day Alexandria. So definitely check him out if you don't already know. And check if this is your first time hearing him, please check out our previous episode. And then check out everything else he does. You won't be disappointed, I assure you. All right. Thank you so much, man. Part 2, as usual, it'll be on Rockfin or Patreon. Thank you so much to everyone supporting through that. And we'll see you there.